We're EarthForce. We are a national nonprofit and the home of Environmental Action Civics. In Field Chats, you'll hear research-based, actionable tips and inspiring stories of youth-adult partnerships that empower young people to become environmental decision makers. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started.
Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to Field Chats, Environmental Action Civics Essentials brought to you by EarthForce. Today we're answering 3 of the most frequently asked questions about environmental action civics. I'm Alyssa McConkey, Chief Program Officer at EarthForce, and I'm here with some of our program team, Taylor and Kristen, and we have Haley on the production side. Hey all, how you doing?
Hello.
Hi all, doing good.
Yeah. I thought since it's the new year, how about we start with resolution or intentions? Do y'all have anything environmental intention or resolution that you want to share?
I do. Yes, I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
Yes, I'm renting this new place, and they don't have recycling services, and I haven't really taken on the challenge of engaging with my landlord and trying to get that service available to me. So I think that will be this new year. So hopefully not taking the whole year, but in this new year, trying to get some of those recycling services for myself and my fellow tenants here.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, mine is similarly, Taylor. I rent, and my laundry services are outdoors, so I have to go outside through the cold to get to my laundry. So partially as a result of that, and also wanting to use less water and energy for the dryer, is to wash my clothes and I house not as often as I need to.
Yeah. Maybe
Keeps
hang
your clothes
dry
nicer as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there you go. We actually at home have this retractable hanger clothesline that is in the garage that is really helpful to pull out at times, and so I use that a lot too. Although Colorado is very different from Virginia. So
yes.
Yeah, things don't dry there, I don't think. But well, mine is based around food, and I don't eat a ton of meat, but I know that's one of big environmental impacts. And the next couple of months, trying to do a really Mediterranean focused diet, so mostly fish and vegetables, grains, and fruit. So that's what I'm working on this season. So, well, thanks guys. Thanks for sharing. I think we'll dive right in with okay, so here are the 3 questions. I'm going to lay them out first, and then Taylor's going to take us away. So first question is, can EAC projects help students meet academic standards or earn certifications like Colorado's climate literacy seal? The second question is, how do you keep students motivated throughout a long-term project? Always a good question. And the third one is, how can you help young people decide on an issue from their collection of strengths and concerns? So I think, Taylor, do you want to start us off with the answer to, can EAC projects help students meet academic standards or earn certifications?
Absolutely, yeah. And short answer is yes, it certainly can. And for that first part, which is meeting those academic standards, I've had the privilege of working with English, social studies, and science teachers to integrate the EAC process into their class units and lessons. And it's really helped all of them accomplish their goals and help their students meet those academic standards, especially when the process that we have, the EAC process, is aligning with the NGSS and C3 standards, which really focus on developing questions, conducting inventories, evaluating sources for their credibility, and taking informed action as well. And so honestly, it's that flexibility of the process that helps integrate it into whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And that's what I like to do here in Colorado. Honestly, that's most of the work that I do, is kind of engaging with those educators and figuring out how it works for them. I think that might be one misconception, that it's kind of a grab and go and here, do this and it will answer, do all your things. It's more of, here's this framework, here's this process that we will work together to figure out a way of how to facilitate it for your students to meet those academic standards. And that's always really yielding really great things, especially around the realm of student-led civic action projects, which kind of can really attain to that last part of the question about the Colorado Climate Literacy Seal. That's a relatively new thing here in Colorado. Some legislation was passed last year providing this diploma endorsement. And so essentially what this endorsement does, it signifies that that student has completed a certain number of courses around climate education and conducted an experiential learning project. And so both of those really help us prepare students to be that next generation of climate and environmentally aware citizens. And through our process, it really helps students accomplish that experiential learning project. So if you're an educator, especially in Colorado, like, well, how am I supposed to help my students get this project done? The process, the AC process is here to help with that, in addition to aligning it with that class and that course that they're also required to complete. And so it's a really two birds, one stone situation where they're building skills, they're learning and all that content. And then in the end, utilizing those skills and information to create these community resilience projects, at least in Colorado. It could look differently everywhere. And I would emphasize that it will look differently depending on where you are, depending on your students and community needs as well. So that's the long version of that. So a resounding yes.
I love that. So your computer or your like audio cut out for like just a tiny second at a time where it sounded like you said 2 birds, 1 scone. And I was like, interesting.
No, that's
what he said.
Oh, you did?
We're feeding the birds. We're not. Oh. 2 birds, 1 scone. They get the scone.
I love that. That's way better than stones. Yes, scones. Thank you. I'm going to adopt that now. Thanks for... I love it. All right, onward. Question 2. Kristen, how do you keep students motivated throughout a long-term project?
This is a big question, and we have concocted a several-part answer. So Alyssa Taylor, feel free to chime in at any point while I'm talking through. So when you're working with students on a long project, whatever long means to you, if you are working with like kindergartners and a week is a long time for them, or if you're working with high schoolers and the semester or the year-long project is a long time for them, I think these tips fit either of those situations. But our first tip is to always return and always turn back to student-led decision-making. And wherever you are at throughout the process, there is an opportunity to do that, whether that is deciding what your research topic for the day is, what your focus in terms of, people, policies, and practices is for the day, whether you want to work in committees for the day or work solo and come back as a group that day. Those are all little bits and pieces that you can decide with your students. And I like to think of those as like quick wins where students are getting the opportunity to work together and make a decision on how they're going to spend their time that day. And that can kind of bring a little bit more energy into whatever it is that you happen to be doing. The other tip that I have in that area around decision making is for you as the facilitator to embrace flexibility in those decisions. So if your students do decide that they want to do something a little bit different today, to fold that into your process of facilitation throughout your environmental action civics experience to really deepen that for your students and just be comfortable with that. As a facilitator, we'll be passing that like comfortability with change onto your students. Second tip there is to start out with your issue, a single issue, just one that is rooted in community need that students care about and that students have chosen. That's one of our 3 essential experiences, that students are choosing the issue rooted in their lived experience. And when it is something that is rooted in students' own lives, it's going to be something that matters to them, that is important to students in their classroom, but also matters to them outside of the scope of your project and outside the classroom too, in their real life. Yep. Something else that we always tell people too is like when you are going through that issue selection, to steer away from issues that might be too big and a little bit too nebulous for students to really grab onto and run with. And that is really where you're going to get that loss of motivation. And so topics like that could be something like climate change. That is such a huge topic that students might feel a little bit lost in tackling that issue. So you can pick something within that, a sub issue, if you will. The analogy that I kind of think of is if your mom calls you up and says, hey, make dinner. And if you're, I don't know, 15 and you're like, what do you mean make dinner? For who? You're lost. You don't know what to do. But if someone told you, put a pot of water on the stove to get boiling, that's a little bit more specific. It's a little bit more concrete, and you're going to know what to do. That kind of goes along with our third tip under this one, which was clear expectations and goals. The greater specificity and the more clear your expectations are with your students, the easier that they're going to have a time staying engaged and staying motivated. This is also a place where you can look back earlier in your process and look back at some goals or expectations or community norms that you co-created together as a group with your students. And returning to those things that you already started with, that's like your motivation was really high in the beginning of the project before you kicked off. Those are good things to look back on. And this is kind of your role as the facilitator too, right? Like your students are off to the races and running with their projects and you're letting them have the reins. But this is an opportunity where you can take that adult role and be like, hey, wait, let's look back at this. If we're losing some steam, we can guide students in that direction. To look back on what we were motivated about at the very start and carry it through.
Let's regroup.
Yes, exactly. And our last tip under this one is to share power and responsibility with young people and really creating that accountability together. That humility coming from an adult or an educator can be really powerful for young people, and it puts them in an environment that is different than their typical classroom, which I've seen from experience too. Just like even that different way of relating with young people can be really energizing, and it just puts folks in a totally different mindset.
Totally. And I think the only other thing I would add on that is like to celebrate often, right? That like, and you mentioned those like quick wins, so it kind of wraps around to that, but it's like, hey, we did this like step, or like at the end of a process doing some reflection on like, wow, look at all the cool things you did and what you learned, or just to like, I think sometimes when things are long and drawn out, you feel like the end goal is the only thing that's important. It's like, no, there's so many great successes along the way, so celebrating those too. So lots of points on that one. Our third question is, how can you help young people decide on an issue from their collection of strengths and issues? So if you're new to this work, we kind of start off the process by exploring our community and investigating issues. They might be around a topic area, but like getting the sense of what the problems are in our community. Working with young people to identify those. And at some point we have a whole bunch of issues, and we also ask young people to look at strengths. And so what are the cool things happening in your community? What are the problems? And at some point you have this like list of all this stuff and you have to narrow it down. And so how do you do that is sometimes it's a space that people get stuck a lot. And Taylor, you might have something to add after this, because I know that's a space you've helped a lot of educators sort of work through. We do have a document that's like moving to an issue statement. And so we will put that in the show notes. But I think a couple of big things. One, giving students the opportunity to debate and discuss the kind of different issues and things they're seeing. Like having a discussion sometimes will elevate a few key things, and other stuff kind of drops out. And you as the facilitator can say like, oh, I'm really hearing a lot of interest around this particular topic. And it can just help to kind of narrow, or maybe this is a good time to do root cause analysis. So this is one that we often talk about using throughout the process. It happens like in step 2 or step 3, but in step 1, if you're and going into like choosing one issue, if you're kind of struggling, maybe doing a root cause tree, just a really basic one for a few of your issues, to see like, are we looking at maybe some symptoms of a problem, and maybe there's a deeper issue that kind of all these different things are connected to, or it might just elucidate a little bit more. And then like when you get to the point where you kind of have a list, we like to say like, 3 to 5-ish, when you are like starting to vote on an issue, having 3 to 5 different options, and you've got it kind of narrowed down. Maybe you're looking at a big board with them on there. Maybe you've put it in a dot storming space, but somehow you're laying them all out for students, and we're going to decide. And EarthForce talks a lot about criteria-based decision making, and that's one option. Although I really prefer that in step 4, because that's when we have a lot of criteria around when we choose a strategy. We have criteria around time and money and all these things. And when it's an issue, there may not be that much criteria, but we do have some resources around criteria-based decision making for an issue. But also you could do, a lot of times this is a great place to do some really quick voting. And if you have a ton of issues, you might have folks vote on their top 3 or do some ranked choice voting, something like that. Once you get down to that 3 to 5, you could do dot storming, you could do a secret ballot, you could do all sorts of different things to make sure that everyone has a voice and that an issue is chosen. As Kristen said, that's a great way to keep engagement going forward, but something that most folks are interested in. And so those are a couple of ways to help narrow down or help to decide on an issue from a collection of strengths and concerns. Anything to add there, y'all? Taylor, would you add anything?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, especially with discussion and debate. I think that's kind of the one I want to focus on the most, because I think when you just do like an objective voting, you can get an objective result, but then you might discover it's like, oh, actually, we're not into that. It's just something I voted on, versus really emphasizing that discussion. And then that shared lived experience is something that I like to focus on too. If it's something that most students are experiencing and most students want to see changed, I think that's another word I like to use when you have this list of concerns and issues. Like, all right, which one do I want different? What do I want different as it relates to my needs as an individual, my community's needs? So I also like to bring in community need as well, individual need, shared lived experience is what I like to emphasize.
And Kristen, anything?
Yeah, no, just that discussion piece is so important for all the reasons that y'all laid out, but also there's a piece of like empathy building in there too. I always liked to have students like go to bat for their issue, and they'd have a minute or two to explain to the group why they think it's important, why they're stoked about it, why should be stoked about it. And that is like a cool thing that young people often don't get the mic for, right?
Yeah. It's like the pre-advocacy, like, guys,
yes,
this is the best thing. Let me tell you why. And like pitching your project, huh? That's cool. Well, thanks everybody so much for tuning in today. Thank you, team, for your great thoughts. As always, let us know what you think over at earthforce.org/podcast. And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Probably Amazon and a bunch of other places too. So look out, and Happy New Year, everybody. Bye.